Welcome, welcome to the Hard Skills Show, where we discuss how to develop the nuanced hard skills, meaning the most challenging soft skills needed to make a real impact through your leadership. If you're experiencing a conflict on a team or across the organization, today, Andrés Peters offers a unique way of looking at understanding and managing change and conflict in organizations. For example, one of the things that he's written about a while ago is how quiet quitting and bad job design are related. So he writes a lot of really interesting, thought-provoking ways of how we can enhance employee engagement and performance, and in ways that maybe we haven't thought of before due to the complexity of what we're facing now. You will find out about all this and more on this episode. Welcome to season 5. It's focused on making a greater impact. I'm excited to have him on. And I am your host, Dr. Mira Brancu. I'm a leadership consulting and coaching psychologist, founder of the Tower Scope Leadership Academy, an associate professor, a Psychology Today columnist, author of the Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, and had my own leadership career before transitioning to helping teams and high-achieving women navigate their leadership complexities. Okay, Andrés Peters, let me introduce you here. Andrés advocates for the importance of learning in the modern workplace through the craft of learning design and how it can provide the best experience for the learner through highly engaging training experiences. He was a talent development manager at Deloitte before transitioning to chief learning officer at Maestro Group, where he helps clients reimagine their talent lifecycle through developing job descriptions, hiring and interviewing, onboarding, training, and coaching, and performance management. So basically the life cycle of people's experiences in an organization, he is on top of it. Andrés is pursuing a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology from Harvard Extension School and applies IO psychology to help leaders shift how they approach their teams to achieve better results without compromising authenticity or expectations. He's advised mid-level to C-suite executives in B2B, which is business to business, B2C, business to consumer and or customer, and B2G, which I found out stands for business to government organizations. Andrés encourages his clients to explore facets of leadership, including creating job embeddedness, inspiring followership, and building psychological safety. Welcome, Andrés.
Thank you, Dr. Mira. I appreciate that warm welcome. Excited to be here today.
I'm super excited that you are here. I love how you think about work complexities and how you write about it. So I'm very excited for you to share some of your knowledge and the way that you think with our audience today. So I'd like to know, let's start with like big picture. What do you want people to take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I want people to take away from our conversation is really understanding that the challenges that they see in performance, the challenges that they see in their people missing metrics are often coming from a lack of understanding of the role itself, the role that they hired someone into. And then that individual's understanding of the expectations and roles that are being set by management that are often misaligned because jobs have just become so complex that the job description that I got hired into maybe 9 months ago, because of the life cycle or the half-life of skills today, probably is obsolete, right? And I need to be learning new skills. So it's really, how do I evolve within my role and still understand kind of what am I going to be expected to do, on a yearly basis, right? Like through normal, typical performance management structures or performance management processes.
That's super interesting. I never put it together until you just sort of shared this perspective that I am getting more and more people reaching out to me for coaching and consultation, where part of the issue is role clarity and the sort of disappointment sometimes, as you mentioned, the disappointment in feeling like they were hired for one thing, but they're asked to do something that feels very different, and how they feel like they're not being able to make the impact that they were hoping in this role because of that, or just the nature of what teams need to accomplish is so complex that it's confusing to people, like what's my role versus your role, or how do we overlap and that kind of thing. So I'm actually really excited to get into this. Now you are bringing some interesting lanes within organizational development specifically together. There's the learning design part of your experience. There's project management. There's change management, team dynamics. You're all kind of putting that together. How do you see these coming together? Um, and how do you see them intersect when it comes to this lack of understanding of role?
Yeah, so I actually lead a lot more on my PMP and my project management professional kind of background, as well as learning through typical project management processes and frameworks. And one of the big ones that I learned that I always am coaching people on, or that I'm always talking about, is this like, concept of the like golden triangle, which is like the people, process, and technology, right? Understanding that the world has shifted. Every organization uses some level of technology. Understanding, do we have the right technology in place? How do we understand how we're using that technology to the best of our ability? So what's the process associated with that? And then do we have the right people in those positions to manage that process, to do those processes, to work with that technology and still motivate them to want to continue to do good work, right? And then give them a path to either staying where they are, right? If they want to go deep within an area of expertise, or if they want to move up in the organization, whether that is more specialized roles or become a people leader, right? And I think there's two things at play, right? There's a little bit of a paradox here, right? Like we make this assumption that everyone wants to move up in an organization, but we found that there are a lot of people who just really want to specialize. So how do we
Yes.
carve out a space for them so that they can specialize and stay within our organization so we can keep that knowledge in-house versus losing them to another organization where they're able to do that because the opportunities are there. So it's understanding kind of what are the different roles that we're creating. What is that progression look like, whether it's going deeper or going, wider within an organization.
Absolutely, yeah. Were there certain experiences or situations that you were encountering often enough that made you interested in applying like project management to the application of understanding role clarity, role development, job descriptions, things like that?
Yeah, for sure. So primarily I tend to work a lot with smaller organizations. So they're a lot leaner and they're a lot more agile, meaning there's less people doing lots of different things. And so they're
Mm,
cross-pollinating in terms of skill sets, they're cross-pollinating in terms of roles. There's a lot of duplication of efforts. And so really what that requires is understanding kind of like what is the whole organization's kind of mission, vision, and values, and how are we giving people the right lanes to operate in so that we're not duplicating those efforts. And then at the same time, we're not micromanaging people, right? Like we're able to put the right people in the right spots. And so that's really where a lot of my project management experience does come in, is understanding the people, what those roles are, what those lanes are, and helping them understand how is it that they're going to be able to measure success, kind of working through this very lean structure. And I think the reason why I always lean on my project management experience is because people tend to say, or organizations tend to be like, we're very agile, right? We're very flexible. Well, flexibility and agility does not equal unstructured. There still has to be a foundation of structure there that you're able to operate within. Whether or not those lines are slightly blurred is one thing, but you don't want it to be a complete, a blob of an organization where you're not able to understand who did what and who owns what, understand who's responsible for what, and ultimately, at the end of the day, who's going to be the one that signs off on something as, done, right?
yeah, yeah. Now, would you mind giving our listeners a crash course in project management? Because project management actually there's a science and a structure to it, and a lot of leaders have never gotten this training. Even when you go to a leadership development program, a year-long program, it develops you, but you still don't learn project management, and yet it's such a critical skill for how teams work effectively that I feel like
Mhm.
it's important to know what it is and to start thinking about how do I get this
Yeah.
skill set.
Yeah. Well, I think what the most interesting myth or assumption about project management is that it's all based on that project timeline, right? Like this is our start date, this is our end date. What happens in the middle is what happens in the middle,
Right.
right? As long as we get, it's kind of like Schrodinger's project, right? During the middle, it's either happening or it's not, but at the end, you get a project. But really, it's a lot more complex. It's understanding, and this kind of gets refined as you continue to do projects. So you do the same types of projects depending on what type of organization you have. But it's really understanding kind of what is the amount of time it takes for you to do kind of those critical path or those most critical steps in order for you to actually wind up with a final product, final service, final deliverable at the end of this project. And beyond that, it's also understanding kind of who are the people behind all of this, who's doing the work. And one concept that I actually like to use, and this is less of like formal use and more like this is me telling you a project management technique that you can use in your organization without actually having to go through an effort. It's the RACI matrix. And for those
Yes.
that aren't familiar, RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And so those are the people, individuals across the organization that you're going to want to engage with, that are either going to be, and sometimes people can be in multiple roles depending on the size of your organization, but really it's understanding, who's going to own this part of the project or this initiative, who's going to be the one that actually is doing it. So who's responsible for it, who's accountable, who's the one that if it fails, that it's not so much that their head is on the chopping block, but they need to understand why it failed. And then where are the other parts of the organization that need to be consulted? Because you're rarely doing a project in a silo. You're bringing in all other aspects of the organization, and then who just needs to be informed along the way to understand kind of where are our roadblocks, who do we need to bring in, like what are the additional resources we may need, and all of that at a high level. Just understanding the people part of it, I think, is where a lot of organizations do fail because they're not really thinking through kind of who's going to be doing the work and then what's the level of escalation if the work isn't getting done,
Yeah.
and kind of what are the consequences, and then what happens if we don't meet a timeline, right? So it's really kind of thinking through some of those bigger questions first before just coming up with a project timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you are finding yourself um, like frustrated that someone's not getting their part done, have you made an assumption that that was their job to begin with? Have you
Mm-hmm.
ever had the conversation, that's your role, this is not my role, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have put together this beautiful project and then you report it to your stakeholders and they're totally disappointed and angry that you didn't include this, and this, that's part of it too. Like, have you
Mm-hmm.
included them at the right stages early and often in your process when they have a stake in your outcomes? So all of
Mm-hmm.
these things are how project management and specifically this RACI model helps. Now,
Yeah.
when we're reaching an ad break, when we come back, Andres, I want to sort of pull this back out to why these things are important when you're thinking, I want to make a great impact for our organization. So you're not going to find that out until we come back from the ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Branco, and our guest, Andres Peters. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. If you'd like to join our online audience and ask questions right now in real time, we can answer in real time. You can find us on LinkedIn or YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Branco, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to the hard skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Andrés Peters. So we've been talking about kind of the combination of project management and change management to how to help people thoughtfully think about their roles on teams so that you can actually get work done. But why are they so important to making a greater impact at an organization? Like if you have a high-level leader, why should they care about what sounds to be, like minutia or small things? Why should they care about these kinds of concepts?
So I definitely think one of the reasons why I think it's really important for leaders to care about this concept is because they can't go into the minutia. So like these frameworks, these tools are really to help them kind of be less down in the weeds and more maybe 10 feet above ground, so that they're able to kind of look across the horizon and see how not only the work that their teams are doing are impacting like their own performance metrics, but also help them see kind of across the organization the impacts of what they're doing may have on other teams. One of the things that I've kind of borrowed from like skill development, which is this concept of T-shaped skills, where you kind of think about, well, what's the breadth of my skill set versus the depth? And the more specialized I become, the more depth I have in terms of that skill set area. I tried and translated that into thinking about my relationships, right? Especially as leaders, you're going to be connecting with people above you, your people that support you, as well as your peers. And you're going to need to have some level of support from your peers because, again, like I mentioned, the work that you do isn't being done in a silo. There are other impacts that can be compounded with other groups. And so being T-shaped in relationships is really understanding what are the relationships that I have across the organization, across different departments? And then also, how deep are those relationships? Am I making them more transactional, where I only go to someone like someone else's boss because I need something? Or am I really understanding kind of what are their goals? What's their strategy look like? And how I may be able to help them with their strategy, or how my strategy may impact them in the long term. And understanding kind of not only where those relationships are from that T-shaped structure, but also understanding how individuals, not just individuals across the organization, what level of influence and power they may have, right? So if you have someone who has, high influence in an organization and high power, you're going to want to make sure that you strengthen that relationship, because that could also impact the work that you do, whether or not it's you get budget, right? If someone has high influence and high power, you may not get the budget that you're looking for, or your project the goals that you have may not be as a high priority as someone else's, versus someone who may have, low influence and low power. Understanding kind of where that person is in the organization. If they need to be elevated, perhaps you're the one that's helping bring them along, getting them the relationships that they need to in the long term. So then that way, if they do get elevated, you're able to use them as a champion later on. So it's really kind of understanding where those different relationships are, understanding the influence that those people have within the organization, and then, what effort are you putting in to develop those relationships in the long term?
Yeah. And so that is like adding yet another layer, which is the the complexity of navigating a complex system with lots of relationship dynamics, right? We often think, oh, I'll just get this project done. I have the plan, I just implement it. But that's the reality is people have to get that thing done. And if you haven't developed the sufficient and right relationships at different stages and for different purposes, that project isn't getting done. And therefore, you're not meeting your outcomes for the organization. And that's the impact, right?
Yeah. And then especially as a leader, right? Like there are different roles that you play as a leader beyond just being the relationship person, understanding who else is in the organization. You've also got to support your own team as they're doing their work, not only supporting them to get the work done, but also understanding what are their career goals, what are their career aspirations, and how can your organization be a place that could be a career destination for them rather than a stop on their career journey. Granted, right, an organization can't be everything for everyone, but if you understand what your organization offers to individuals, you can make sure that as long as they're there, they're engaged, they're motivated. And if they do move on, that it's something that doesn't become something that you're reactive to. You understand, okay, this person's time in this organization is limited because I know what they're looking for out of their career, and they're not going to be able to get it here. So I can start planning on who else can we start bringing in to cross skill, develop? Who else can we start bringing in from external that could fill in that gap, longer term, and be more of a proactive leader of your team rather than having to rush and fill a JD or job description because that person realized, you know what, this is not the place for me. I found another job that's, offering a little bit more money and, there's more job opportunities. So I'm going to be gone in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Now let me use that and pick your brain a little bit. And this is me asking for consultation to Andres. So let's say that you're consulting with a leader, and what's happened is one of their very high level leaders, very talented, comes to them and says, "You hired me for this, and I'm doing this and this and this, and it's not even impacting this, and someone else is actually taking over most of the things on my job description to the point where I feel like I don't even know what I'm doing here." Where would you start with this situation?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge, I will say. And I guess where I would start is kind of understanding, well, what is that person doing now first? I would
Right.
ask, what is it that they're doing? And then also thinking about, okay, well, what are their career aspirations? What are they looking for in terms of, the role that they had sought out for originally? And see, is this something that is just because we've just gotten lost in the shuffle? We misplaced these responsibilities to someone else because they took it on. They just started taking it on. Or is there another role for this individual within the organization? They may be high level, high performing at a certain point, but if they've reached the point where they're doing a role that they're not happy in, it's going to end up kind of permeating itself within the organization, whether that be them complaining to people like, I'm not doing what I was meant to do, or them kind of doing that idea of quiet quitting, right? Like, okay, well, I've told them that I'm not happy here and I'm just going to do the bare minimum until I find another job or they let me go. I want to see how long I have this runway for, right? And understanding too, okay, not just helping that leader or that owner or that CEO, whoever I'm coaching, understand kind of where it went, like where that person wants to go, but also what went wrong, because more likely than not, this is happening to other people within the organization as well. And this individual's just gotten to a point where they're ready. They've finally spoken up, but I highly doubt most of the times it's not an isolated incident, right? That happens throughout the whole organization. Because what the other person was doing, depending on what their job description was, I'm sure someone else is doing what they're doing, or that individual is really overworked, and you need to spread out those responsibilities so the person that had the original role gets those responsibilities back, and that way that other individual isn't stretched too thin.
Yeah, and this is speaking to that super interesting post I think you posted it actually last year, but I was rereading it as I was preparing for this around the connection that you made between quiet quitting and bad job design. And that sounds like what you're starting to speak to here. What do leaders need to know about the impact of bad job design on quiet quitting, morale, burnout, all kinds of other things? What would they do differently?
Yeah. So I think a way to before it becomes quiet quitting becomes an issue, it's first understanding kind of what are the job roles that you have within your organization, and see, like, do these even make sense anymore? Because if you've had people in their roles for 4 or 5 years, they're likely doing different things that they weren't doing 4 or 5 years ago, because the job market, technology, kind of the entire all industries have changed or have shifted
Interesting.
significantly, especially when it comes to like anyone that's doing any sort of knowledge management work, so any sort of like consulting type work or services work. Even products change. And so understanding, are the roles that we've hired people into, do they still make sense? Then it's understanding, how are we measuring these individuals, because you want to make sure that the job description matches what they're going to be assessed on in the year. And if you look at past assessments, understanding how strong is our process, like, because we should have been able to catch this, right, in previous iterations or views of our performance management process. And depending on the size of your organization, if you're really small, it's probably not a very robust performance management process, but not to say that you have to have one. It's just understanding, are we tying the role to what we're measuring people on? And if there's a misalignment there, then it's just adjusting based on what people are doing now. It's almost doing a job analysis, or role analysis, and understanding what the different tasks are that people do in their day to day, and then redefining the roles based on what they're actually doing. And then if you're forward thinking enough, is like, okay, how long will what's the half-life of what they're doing now? And how
Hmm.
far do we need to start thinking about the future, so we can either see if this is the right person to continue in this role, or should we start bringing in other folks, or should we start bringing in, or should we start looking at who we currently have who could fill that spot, right? Should that person decide to leave?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Multiple perspectives here. First, that we really need to stop thinking about roles as like for a forever thing, that things
Mhm.
are changing too fast, things are too complex to not consider sunsetting certain roles or like parts of roles. The second, I have a question for you about how do you do this since you work for B2G, business to government? Um, how do you think about this? Do you think about this differently for them? Because they have so many regulations when it comes to changing role descriptions, sunsetting things, letting people move around. You can't do that in certain government systems. And so how would you manage when there's a lot of regulations around the protection of role job descriptions, what you do in those jobs, who can be in those jobs, all of that stuff?
Yeah, so I think so typically when I'm working with B2G organizations, a lot of times those roles are filled based on what those government regulations are in terms of time, experience, education level. So it's really understanding, like, what are the minimum regulatory requirements that are part of that role. And then oftentimes different roles have additional kind of internal responsibilities within an organization, whether that's, helping with business development, helping, be a people leader for an organization, going to conferences, being like the brand identity of the organization. And so it's really understanding kind of like that variable part, because you have the fixed part, right? That you have to have regardless of what the role is, because that's the only way that you're able to, get a fill the requirements for any sort of contractual obligation you have with any like state or local or federal governments. And then it's just understanding, like, what's the rest of that role look like. And what's interesting is understanding, I call it like the job diet. So like everyone's time is finite, right? And so thinking about your time like you would think a diet, there's only a certain number of calories or a certain amount of time people can spend doing certain things in their role. So how are you carving out those macros, right, between the core job responsibilities versus those ancillary job responsibilities? And if you're over indexing on the ancillary part, then they're probably also over indexing on the core part because you're expecting them to do the core part as well. So how do you fix
Brilliant.
that diet a little bit to make sure that you're balancing it out?
That's brilliant. I have one more question about, you mentioned knowledge workers and how like they might experience this problem more often, where roles change over time. Um, First, let's have you define knowledge workers for everybody. And then I'm curious about what your thought is on how you measure performance of knowledge workers that might be different from other kinds of employee jobs.
Yeah. So I define a knowledge worker as someone who's like not working with widgets or products, so like non-manufacturing, non-industrial, but mostly those that either are coming to bring in strategy, consulting type work, mainly those services type roles like that, where it's very difficult to do a objective measurement of their work outside of looking at like, profit, revenue. So like those metrics are a little bit harder. For example, someone who may be in sales, they may be measured on the number of calls that they're doing and the number of their emails that they're sending. But for a knowledge worker, it's not really that. It's more, how are you working towards achieving the end of that project, right? Almost going back to that project management, making sure that you're completing the work that you need to do to achieve the ultimate goal of that project. So remind me of the question again. So
I think you answered it. I think you answered it. That like, what are they and how do you measure their performance? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you met
yes. Yeah. And I was going to go back. One of the things is understanding kind of so like thinking about it from like an IO perspective, right? Your KSAOs, your knowledge, skills, attitudes, and other traits, how do those all kind of blend together into the competencies that you would expect someone to have? And really where you would measure those individuals is how are they aligning to those competencies based on their level. So someone who's more junior, you're not asking them to make complex models in Excel, but you may be asking them to understand some of the normal functions that someone would be using on a day-to-day basis in Excel. So it's really thinking about how they're looking at data, how they're looking at turning data into information, as a way for you to measure those individuals. It's a lot more complex, I will say. And I will say those actually take a lot. You're going to have to check in more frequently because it's not something that you're going to be able to assess once a year. You're going to be doing it multiple times.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are reaching ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Andrés Peters. And we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Andres Peters. So we've been talking a lot about job design and T-shaped individuals and influence and power matrix. Like I love all of the frameworks that you share. I always learn something new from you, Andres. And one of the things I think we have in common is our passion and interest around strong teams, developing strong teams. But we, might take a different perspective around this. So how do you put together these issues around role clarity and influence and impact when it comes to team performance? And especially like if you have a new leader, what are the first things they need to be thinking about to set their teams up for success and set themselves up for success?
Yeah. So one of the, I guess it's understanding kind of where you may be on this spectrum of like the imposter syndrome versus, like Dunning-Kruger syndrome, where, where people don't feel like they're ready to be a people leader versus people who become people leaders who definitely are not ready to be a people leader, that they think that their skill sets will, immediately they'll be able to translate those into managing, their peers or other individuals. And so one of the things that I like to do with, especially with new leaders, is helping them understand what their quote unquote roles are. Because within leadership, right, like you can have you can play multiple different roles. You can either be a leader, someone who's setting the vision, someone that's identifying kind of what are our macro goals for the organization, how are we aligning to strategy. You can be a manager, someone that's assigning different tasks to different people, making sure that they're doing their tasks, helping them, helping them work through certain roadblocks, right, within their work. And then there's this more people career focused one where you can be more of a coach, someone that's helping them develop their skill set by co-creating with them idea solutions, helping them see who else or how else they may be able to reach out across the org, kind of helping them build their own, their own leadership identity. And then you have someone who's a mentor who really you're not there to help them with any specific problem, but really just there to share your experience, kind of how you moved up within the organization, what are the certain things, pitfalls that you want them to be aware of. And sometimes these roles can blend a little bit, but it's just understanding the role that you need to play based on, how you're engaging with the individual on your team. One of the ways that I often coach people on this is when you have one-on-ones, right? If you're often going into these one-on-ones talking about the work, then you're doing a good job of managing, potentially coaching as well. But what you want to do, if that's often what happens, and that may be what your team needs, but for them to be able to continue to evolve as a professional, within your organization, is setting up separate time to be that coach, that leader, that mentor, helping them see the bigger picture. So I'll often coach people to be, okay, you'll do one meeting a week. That'll be, 45 minutes. We get together. I answer all the questions you have. And then every other week we'll have an additional 30-minute meeting. We'll talk about like what were the goals for the year, how you feel like you're going them, what other skills you feel like you need, and how we may be able to help you within the organization, so that people don't get lost in just the work itself and then feel like their impact, your own individual contributors' impact, they're not really seeing the big picture of that at the end of the year. And then also another piece of that is really asking or really getting to understand kind of what it is that they're looking for out of their own careers. Because that's really where the authenticity comes in, from folks, because if they feel like they're engaged within an organization, they're aligning themselves, their own personal mission with their organization's mission. If they have a crystal clear view of the vision, then they are better able to see, how they may be able to evolve, not just within their own skill set, but perhaps even more broadly in the organization as a whole, maybe pivoting into another part of the organization. Like I did in my previous, when I was at Deloitte, I started as an auditor and I became a learning and development person. But that was because of the great coaches that I had within the organization that really helped me kind of think through what my career looked like or what my career could look like, within the organization.
Yeah, and it serves multiple purposes. You don't want to have an employee who is just there completing a job, but actually miserable. They won't
Mhm.
complete the job well if they're unhappy, miserable, or they don't see their connection to the bigger picture where they're contributing to something meaningful. And I feel like, especially in this day and age with younger generations, they really want to make a difference. They want meaningful work. They're not
Mhm.
just there for the paycheck. Well, some of them are, but many of them really want the mentorship. They want the coaching. They want to feel like they're connected to a bigger mission and they're making an impact. And so, leaders who recognize that and lean into that and offer that are more likely to have higher retention, greater, satisfaction, or have people like you who they helped realize this is not the right place for me. I'm not going to be my very best in this kind of role for long term, but I might be able to contribute in a different way across the organization, and the organization then will be able to retain this talent, even if they're doing something different, which ultimately is kind of a broader organizational goal instead of just my goal as a manager to just get things
Mhm.
done.
Yeah. And what's also interesting too, and this is more anecdotal than it is like research back, but from what I found, especially with like younger generations, especially with their leaders today, is yes, but I go, yes, and right. Like, yes, we want to provide meaningful work. We want them to feel really engaged, but at the same time, we want to make sure that they're developing their skill sets in a way that allows them to work within the context of our organization, right? Like, so you're providing them the content around meaningful work, but you're providing them the context in which they're going to be able to operate in that. And so it's having that emotional intelligence of understanding, in this particular instance, does this person need me to tell them exactly what to do so that they are able to do it the next time? Or is this person really needing me to kind of work with them to come up with a solution because it's just something that they're not comfortable with right at this moment, and they may be comfortable more in the future. So it's kind of figuring out, do I need to be more directive or supportive in that way, for this individual?
Yeah, and real quick before we get to the ad break, um, what are your thoughts on that balance between offering support and coaching versus the accountability expectation setting? Because I feel like a lot of leaders are challenged by finding the right balance there.
Yes, right. It's that whole concept of like today's pain is tomorrow's gain, right? Like, do I help them today and help them figure it out? But it's going to take a lot longer for me to teach them versus me doing it myself. It's tough. It really is tough. But what I will say is, this whole idea of like, if you're explaining something more than 2 or 3 times to someone, then it's time that that's when that person needs to take ownership of, this is part of my role. I can't to go, how am I going to be able to continue to do this in the future when I'm not there? Right. It's almost like asking, if I'm not here, what would you do if I weren't here to explain to you where this is or how to do this? But going through it once, twice, sometimes is what that individual needs for it to click. But for the leader of themselves, right, this whole concept of like temporal discounting, I was taking a course on neuroscience, and the concept of neuroeconomics came in. But what was really fascinating to me was this concept of temporal discounting, where we tend to seek immediate gains or immediate rewards versus long-term gains. And so the immediate reward is, I got this done in 15 minutes, even though the long-term gain could have been, that'll save me an hour, next month, from having to switch tasks too much in order to get something done. So it's really thinking through, like, is this in best service of me in the moment, or is this in best service of that individual kind of long-term for them and also long-term for me as well?
Yeah, yeah. Great. Okay, we are reaching another ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Andres Peters. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can find us on LinkedIn or YouTube right now at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to the hard skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Andrés Peters, a guru in job design and team performance and all things IO Psych. And there's two final things I want us to talk about that you have been sort of exploring and interested in that I actually feel like I don't know much about. And the first is job embeddedness. What is that? Why should we care?
Yeah, so job embeddedness, I will say, is one of the is a framework. I believe it came out of the Academy of Management Journal around early 2001s, but it basically defines embeddedness within an organization based on the links, the fit, and the sacrifice for people within your organization. So really the links, like who are the connections that they have within the organization? I mean, now that most roles have some level of virtual like work, that level of connectedness is definitely a lot harder to not only maintain, but create, especially if you're bringing in new people within an organization. And so that's why oftentimes people tend to leave so quickly, because they haven't developed those relationships to connect authentically and to connect, on a deeper level with their peers. The fit is really, how does that role fit with their career goals, their career objectives, and also the skill set that they have. Again, thinking about it from an onboarding perspective, which is one of my passion areas, is, how are you making sure that you're providing the content with the context, right? Especially if you brought someone in who has a lot of experience, how do they parlay that experience into your role, into your organization, into your processes? And then lastly, this idea of sacrifices. What people would leave behind if they were to decide to leave. This, especially for those that, who have a lot of institutional knowledge within an organization, those that, are well respected within your organization, wanting to make sure that you're providing them an experience that will make them want to stay. And sacrifice, I don't like, not a great word to use, but it's almost like, what would the FOMO be? What would the fear of missing out be if they were to leave, right?
Yeah.
The organization. And usually, especially if you've got a really good employee experience, outside of, job security, job progression, benefits, right? The sacrifice is what people tend to stay. I'll hear from people that are thinking about leaving a role is, I just don't want to leave my team. I love my team. So like, how are you creating that environment for them that makes them want to stay overall?
Oh, that's brilliant. So in order for leaders to think about job embeddedness, they would need to be thinking about, how am I creating the kind of environment that makes it hard to leave because people are getting a lot out of it. And that also includes thinking about what they're bringing to the table, valuing it, including it in their job, and creating the kind of connections that are actually meaningful. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things too that I like to coach, especially new leaders on, is that they feel like they have to do this all themselves. Like I have to figure this out for my team.
Right.
Well, no, like if you've developed relationships, there may be someone on your team that's really passionate about creating a team culture. So perhaps again, thinking about that racy, right? You may be ultimately accountable for creating culture, having a strong culture on your team, but you could put that responsibility on someone else to come up with like, what does that look like for us? Right. And how
Yeah.
you consult with other members of the team and inform your leadership. So this is where some of those different frameworks can come into play, especially if you want to delegate some of these responsibilities to other people, but without losing that sense of control or ownership at the end of the day.
Oh, I love this new framework that I just learned. Thank you. And the final framework I'm curious about is team versus task conflict. Now, my gut about what this one is about is that we often see that sometimes there's a conflict between people and they make it about the people, but it's actually not the people at all. It's about something where the process is off and you haven't sort of put the process in place. Is that right? Am I right on that one?
Yes, yeah. And it's really, again, this is what I love about team versus task framework. It helps you somewhat remove the person
Yeah.
from the conflict. It's almost like when you're going into coaching, you don't want to ask someone like why they did something because they get defensive. Instead, it's like, what about the environment caused this issue? So it's almost the same thing. What about the task is causing this issue? And if what you're getting back is like, well, they were really mean to me, they were doing all this stuff, then you probably have more of a, team conflict than you have a task conflict. But if it's we didn't agree on, the right process, then that's more of like, okay, well, what, like, how was it explained? And it's really just understanding at the end of the day where that conflict comes from or where that difference of opinion comes from. And if
Yeah.
you've got a really strong team, people tend to work through task conflict much easier. But if you have a team that isn't really connected well at all, those task conflicts can then become team conflicts because people aren't sure how to resolve them between themselves, that you actually have to be brought in as the leader to help kind of play referee.
Yes, and untangle what they've tangled up
Yes.
in people.
Yes.
Okay, so holy moly, you have given us so much to think about. And I mean, I have written down things around role clarity and misalignments, golden triangle, T-shaped, individuals and skills, influence and power matrix, knowledge, work, job, diet, team versus task conflict, job embeddedness. Oh my goodness, so much information. So from that, what is one thing that you would like people to take away from all of this, to sort of know which way to go, which way to sort of like apply it to their life right now?
Yeah. So what I would say is that, often organizations feel that the challenges that they're seeing, or leaders that the challenges that they're seeing are unique challenges, but oftentimes those challenges are just unique to them. And so really understanding that there is information out there, there are frameworks that they can lean on, and they don't have to lean on it word for word, just what works best for them based on how they operate, based on how they know their, leadership brand is or how their leadership identity is. And they can bring that into the workplace very easily, versus, having to go through a complete triage of their team, a complete triage of the projects that they're working on or the process. And then, I will say that they're not doing a lot of this is they don't have to do it alone, right? If they've got a team under them, more likely than not, there's probably someone that would be interested in helping them out. And this is where that followership concept that I also like to talk about comes in, where like you want people, as you're elevating yourself up, to follow behind you, because then those are the people that, will come in and help and support you and celebrate you, but they're also there that you can use to get that 360 feedback, right? Like, I'm thinking about doing this. Like, is this how you would see it, versus trying it out, on your team and failing right away. So
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely there's a community out there for them that they can tap into, whether or not they know it.
Excellent, excellent. So you are not alone is the message.
Yes,
There
yes.
are frameworks and there are people.
Yeah.
If people want to learn more about your work, where can they go?
So I primarily am on LinkedIn. I am currently building my own practice around learning design, also coaching. But that website has said under construction for the last 8 months. So you're not going to find much there. But you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active in the messages. So if they want to send me a message, I'm always happy to talk to people. I geek out on this stuff, as you can obviously
Yes.
tell. And so I'm
Awesome.
always happy to talk to anyone if they're interested in learning more or just have any questions just to bounce things off of. I'm always here for that and always
Great.
willing to.
Andres Peters, PMP, is where
Yes.
you will find him on LinkedIn, and you better start following him. You'll love his content. Now, audience, what did you take away from today? And more importantly, what is one small change that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Andres? Share it with us on LinkedIn. We both live there now. You
Yes.
know, we're right there. Share it with us on LinkedIn and at talkradio.nyc so we could cheer you on. Talk Radio is also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all over the place. And we're also on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon podcasts after the live show. So please help us increase our visibility, reach, and impact by leaving a review there as well. The stuff that we talk about on this show is also part of our research-based strategic leadership pathway roadmap that we use to teach in our TowerScope Leadership Academy. You can find out more about that at gotowerscope.com. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. I'm Dr. Mara Brancu, your host of the Hard Skills Show. And thank you for joining us today, Andres. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, wherever you're tuning in from. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.